and she hit the floor with a sickening thud that echoed off the mahogany walls of the courtroom. One moment, Callie was standing, clutching her swollen belly, fighting for her life. The next, she was unconscious on the cold tile. But what chilled everyone in that room wasn't just the pregnant woman collapsing. It was the reaction from the gallery. While the bailiff rushed to help, the mistress in the front row didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. She just fixed her lipstick and smiled. She thought she had won. She thought the DNA test in the judge's hand was her golden ticket. She had no idea that the piece of paper was about to destroy her entire world. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B of the Cook County Circuit Court in Chicago was broken, or at least it felt that way. The air was thick, smelling faintly of floor wax and anxious sweat. For Callie Jenkins, 8 months pregnant and sitting in a chair that seemed designed to torture the human spine, the heat was suffocating. She shifted her weight, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her lower back. Her ankles were swollen over the straps of her sensible flats, a stark contrast to the woman sitting 2 rows behind the defense table. Jessica Vane. Callie didn't have to turn around to know Jessica was there. She could smell her, a cloud of overly sweet Chanel perfume that seemed to cling to the humidity. Jessica wasn't wearing sensible flats. According to Callie's best friend, who was currently gripping Callie's hand under the table, Jessica was wearing 4-inch Louboutins and a red dress that was entirely too short for a family court hearing. "Don't look at them," Diane Rossi, Callie's attorney, whispered. Diane was a bulldog of a woman, barely 5 feet tall, with graying hair chopped short and a mind like a steel trap. "Look at me. Focus on your breathing." "I can't breathe, Diane," Callie murmured, her voice trembling. "He's really doing this. Look at him." At the opposing table sat Robert. Rob, the man Callie had been married to for 7 years. The man she had built a life with, renovated a historic greystone in Lincoln Park with, and the man who was currently pretending she didn't exist. He looked immaculate in a navy bespoke suit, his dark hair gelled back, checking his Rolex as if he had a tea time to catch. He looked like the successful architect everyone thought he was. He didn't look like a man who had emptied their joint savings account 3 weeks ago and served her divorce papers on the same day she had her baby shower. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. Judge Anthony Miller swept into the room. He was a man known for zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, which made what was about to happen all the more volatile. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the rim at the 2 tables. "Docket number 24, D0991, Jenkins versus Jenkins," the judge read, his voice flat. "We are here to address the emergency motion regarding paternity, spousal support, and the division of assets. Counsel, you may proceed." Rob's lawyer stood up first. Arthur Sterling was a legend in Chicago divorce law, mostly because he cost $600 an hour and had no soul. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the center of the room, offering a sympathetic nod to the judge and a look of utter disdain toward Callie. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth as oil, "this case is tragic. Truly. My client, Mr. Jenkins, is a victim of profound deceit. For months, he has supported Mrs. Jenkins, believing that the child she carries is his. He has paid the mortgage, the medical bills, and endured the emotional toll of a failing marriage." Sterling paused for effect, walking back to the defense table to place a hand on Rob's shoulder. Rob looked down, feigning sorrow. "But," Sterling continued, his voice hardening, "we have come into possession of irrefutable evidence that suggests Mrs. Jenkins has been unfaithful. We have witness testimony stating she was seen entering the apartment of a former colleague late at night. We have credit card receipts for hotel rooms. Mr. Jenkins is filing for a complete annulment of financial responsibility based on paternity fraud." A murmur went through the courtroom. Callie felt the blood drain from her face. "Liar!" she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I never— Diane, tell them!" Diane squeezed her hand hard, silencing her. "Wait. Furthermore," Sterling said, gesturing to the gallery, "Mr. Jenkins has found solace and true partnership with Miss Jessica Vane, who is also currently expecting Mr. Jenkins's child, a child whose paternity is not in question. Mr. Jenkins simply wishes to preserve his resources for his biological heir, not the product of his wife's affair." In the gallery, Jessica shifted, making sure the light caught the massive diamond ring on her finger, a ring Rob had bought with money that should have gone to Callie's hospital deposit. She placed a hand on her own stomach, which was barely showing a bump, and smirked directly at the back of Callie's head. Judge Miller frowned, looking between the two parties. "Those are heavy accusations, Mr. Sterling. You are claiming the wife's child is not his, but the mistress's is." "Precisely, Your Honor, and we demanded a prenatal DNA test to prove it, the results of which are in that sealed envelope on your bench." Callie's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the baby was Rob's. There had been no one else. There was never anyone else. But Rob was an architect of buildings and lies. If he could fake bank statements, could he fake a DNA test? The fear wasn't about the truth. It was about what Rob could buy. Diane Rossi stood up slowly. She didn't have the theatrics of Sterling, but she had a cold, terrifying calm. "Your Honor," Diane said, her voice projecting clearly without shouting, "Mr. Sterling tells a compelling story. It's a shame it belongs in the fiction section. My client is 8 months pregnant, suffering from pre-eclampsia, and has been left destitute by a man who transferred $200,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands 3 days before filing for divorce." Rob's head snapped up. For the first time, the mask slipped. He glared at Diane. "As for the paternity," Diane continued, walking towards the bench, "we welcome the results, because when that test proves the baby is his, we will be asking for sanctions against Mr. Jenkins for filing frivolous motions to cause emotional distress to a high-risk patient." "Objection!" Sterling barked. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Miller said, though he looked intrigued. "Miss Rossi, stick to the facts." "The fact, Your Honor," Diane said, turning to face Rob, "is that Mr. Jenkins is trying to discard his wife like a used car because he found a newer model, and he is terrified of the alimony payments." "That is enough!" Rob shouted, standing up. "She's a cheater. Everyone knows it. Sit down, Mr. Jenkins." The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. The room fell silent. The tension was so tight it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Callie's chest. Her vision began to blur at the edges. The heat in the room seemed to spike 20 degrees. "I need water," Callie whispered, but her voice was too weak. "We will proceed to the evidence," Judge Miller said, picking up the large white envelope sealed with red tape. "This contains the prenatal paternity results conducted by LabCorp regarding the unborn child of Callie Jenkins." The sound of the paper tearing was deafening in the silence. Callie tried to focus on the judge's face, but the room was spinning. Dark spots danced in her eyes. She saw Jessica in the gallery, leaning forward, that predatory smile widening. Jessica looked like a cat watching a mousetrap snap shut. He paid someone off, Callie thought, panic rising like bile. He switched the samples. He's going to win. I'm going to be homeless with a baby. The stress, the heat, and the lack of sleep finally collided. The floor seemed to tilt aggressively to the left. "Callie!" Diane's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Callie tried to grip the table, but her fingers were numb. The darkness rushed in from the sides of her vision, swallowing the courtroom, the judge, and Rob's cruel face. "Oh my God, she's falling!" someone screamed. Callie didn't feel the impact. She just felt the lights go out. The courtroom erupted into chaos. "Call 911!" Diane Rossi was on her knees instantly, ignoring the stiffness in her own joints, cradling Callie's head. "She's not responsive. Get a medic! Judge Miller was already on his feet, pointing his gavel at the bailiff. Clear the gallery! Get the paramedics in here now! In the midst of the scramble, Rob Jenkins stood frozen. He didn't rush to his wife. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking down at Callie's unconscious body with the expression of someone whose flight had just been delayed. She's faking it, Rob muttered to Sterling, loud enough for the stenographer to hear. She always does this for attention. Shut your mouth, Diane snapped, looking up from the floor with eyes full of fury. If she loses this baby, Rob, I will make sure you're charged with manslaughter. Mr. Jenkins, sit down and be quiet, Judge Miller warned, his voice low and dangerous. In the gallery, the bailiffs were herding people out, but Jessica Vane moved slowly. She stood near the railing, clutching her designer purse. She wasn't looking at Callie with concern. She was looking at Rob, trying to make eye contact, mouthing the words, "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. To understand why Callie was lying on a courtroom floor and why Jessica was smiling, we have to go back 6 months. We have to peel back the layers of the perfect life Rob had constructed. Callie and Rob had been the golden couple of their social circle in Chicago. Rob was a charismatic architect who claimed to be bidding on massive skyscrapers. Callie was a graphic designer who had put her career on hold to manage the accounting for Rob's firm. Or so she thought. The cracks started to show on a Tuesday in November. Callie was 3 months pregnant then, still in the glow of the news. She had gone into Rob's home office to grab a stapler. Rob was strict about his office. Client privilege, he called it. But he had left the door ajar. On his desk, buried under a pile of blueprints, was a receipt. It wasn't for construction materials. It was for a dinner at Alinea, a 3 Michelin-star restaurant. The bill was $1,200. The date was last Friday. Last Friday, Rob had told Callie he was in a late-night zoning meeting with the city council. Callie had stared at the receipt, her stomach turning. But it was the itemized list that froze her blood. Champagne, Wagyu, 2 tasting menus, and a handwritten note on the bottom in a script that wasn't Rob's, to new beginnings. J. That night, Callie didn't confront him. She did what any smart woman protecting her unborn child would do. She dug. She logged into the firm's accounting software. As the bookkeeper, she had access, but Rob had recently upgraded the system and told her he hired an external firm to handle the heavy lifting. When she tried to access the operating account, she was locked out. Password changed. She tried his personal email. Changed. For weeks, she played the role of the happy wife while silently tracking him. She used the Find My feature on the iPad he shared with the house account. He wasn't at zoning meetings. He was at the Langham Hotel. He was at a luxury condo building on the Gold Coast, a building his firm hadn't designed. Then came the discovery that shattered her denial. Callie had driven to the Gold Coast condo one rainy Tuesday. She sat in her Honda Civic, watching the entrance. At 6 p.m., Rob walked out. He was laughing, looking younger and more carefree than he had in years. Hanging onto his arm was a woman in a red trench coat, Jessica Vane. Callie knew her. Jessica was a 24-year-old interior design intern Rob had hired 6 months prior. Callie had even bought her a Starbucks gift card for her birthday. Watching them kiss under the awning of the building, Callie felt a physical blow to her gut. But the real horror came when she went home and checked the mail. A foreclosure notice, final notice of default. Rob hadn't paid the mortgage in 4 months. The money, Callie's savings, the firm's profits, the equity, was gone. He was bleeding them dry to fund a high-roller lifestyle for a mistress who thought he was a billionaire. When Callie finally confronted him, throwing the foreclosure notice on the kitchen island, Rob didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He looked at her with cold, dead eyes and dropped the bomb that led them to court. "I'm leaving, Callie, and I'm not taking any debt with me. And by the way, I don't think that baby is mine." "What?" Callie had gasped, Are you insane? Jessica is pregnant, Rob said, delivering the line like a rehearsed speech. She's carrying my real family. You're just a mistake I made in my 30s, and my lawyer will prove you're the cheater to make sure I don't pay a dime in alimony. Back in the present, the paramedics burst through the courtroom doors. Make way! They swarmed Callie. One checked her vitals while another set up an IV. BP is 180 over 110, the medic shouted. She's hypertensive. We need to transport her immediately. Possible placental abruption. Diane Rossi stood up, her face pale. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, if anything happens to that baby... Judge Miller looked down at the envelope in his hands, the DNA test he hadn't had a chance to read yet. He looked at Rob, who was checking his watch again. Court is in recess, Miller said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Mr. Jenkins, you and your counsel are to remain in the building. Do not leave the premises. But I have a lunch reservation, Rob said, genuinely annoyed. If you take one step out of this building, Mr. Jenkins, Judge Miller said, leaning over the bench, I will have you thrown in a holding cell for contempt so fast your head will spin. Sit down. As they wheeled Callie out on the stretcher, she briefly regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw the ceiling tiles rushing by. She saw Diane running alongside the stretcher. Diane, Callie rasped. I'm here, honey. I'm here. The test. Don't worry about the test. Rob... Callie grabbed Diane's wrist with surprising strength. Rob isn't... He's not... Not what? He's not who he says he is. And then she passed out again. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, Jessica Vane stood on the courthouse steps, lighting a slim cigarette. She texted Rob. Is she dead? Did we win? She had no idea that Callie's cryptic last words were the key to unraveling a scheme much darker than a simple affair. The DNA test was just the tip of the iceberg. While Callie was being rushed to Northwestern Memorial Hospital with sirens wailing, the atmosphere inside the courthouse waiting area was toxic. Rob Jenkins sat on a wooden bench, scrolling through Instagram. His lawyer, Sterling, was pacing, talking rapidly into his phone. I don't care about the optics. I care about the timeline, Sterling hissed into the receiver. If she miscarries, the paternity suit is moot. But the wrongful death suit... Yes, I know. Rob looked up. She's not going to die, Arthur. She's dramatic. It's probably just low blood sugar. Sterling ended his call and looked at his client with a mixture of professional obligation and personal disgust. You better hope she's fine, Rob, because Judge Miller is looking for a reason to hang you. You saw his face. Miller is a dinosaur, Rob scoffed. He can't ignore the DNA. Once he reads that the kid isn't mine, Callie gets nothing. No alimony, no child support. I'm free. Just then, the double doors swung open. Jessica Vane walked in. She had ignored the bailiff's instructions to stay in the gallery and had somehow charmed her way into the restricted waiting area. Rob! She trotted over, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She threw her arms around him. God, that was intense. Is she okay? Actually, never mind. Did the judge read the results? Not yet, Rob said, pulling her close. He kissed her forehead, but his eyes were darting around, checking to see who was watching. He paused the proceedings. Ugh, Jessica rolled her eyes. She always has to make it about her. Typical. Jessica sat down, crossing her legs. She pulled a compact mirror out and checked her teeth. So I was looking at nurseries for the new place. I'm thinking grey and gold, very modern, since the baby is a boy, obviously. Jess, not now, Sterling warned. We are still in the courthouse. So we're winning, Jessica said. Rob said the plan is bulletproof. Sterling narrowed his eyes at Rob. Rob, what exactly did you tell her? Rob stiffened. I told her we have a strong case. Jessica laughed. Strong? Rob said he paid the lab tech to... Jessica! Rob shouted, his voice echoing in the hallway. Sterling froze. He looked at his client, and then at the mistress. He did what? Jessica looked confused, realizing she had said too much. I mean, he paid for the expedited service to get the results faster. Right, babe? Sterling stared at Rob. The lawyer's face went deadly serious. Rob, I need you to be very honest with me right now. Did you tamper with a court-ordered DNA test? Of course not, Rob said, laughing nervously. She's crazy. Pregnancy brain, right? She doesn't know what she's talking about. Sterling didn't look convinced. If you tampered with that test, I can't help you. That's a federal offense. That's prison time. I didn't touch it, Rob insisted. Look, Callie is the one who cheated. I'm the victim here. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the situation was critical. Doctors were swarming around Callie. Her blood pressure was critical. They had to perform an emergency C-section. We have to get the baby out now, the obstetrician yelled. Prepare the OR. Diane Rossi was in the waiting room, pacing. She had her phone to her ear. She wasn't calling her office. She was calling her private investigator, a retired Chicago PD detective named Mike Kowalski. Mike, tell me you have something, Diane said, her voice tight. I've got something, all right. Mike's gravelly voice came through. I've been digging into Rob Jenkins's financials like you asked. Diane, this guy is a ghost. What do you mean? I mean, I checked his architecture license. It's expired. It expired 4 years ago. He's been stamping blueprints with a falsified seal. Diane stopped pacing. He's practicing without a license. That's fraud. It gets better, Mike said. I looked into the offshore account you mentioned. The money didn't go to the Caymans. It went to a shell company in Delaware, registered to a J. Vane Designs. Diane's eyes widened. Jessica Vane? The Mistress? Yep. He drained Callie's life savings and dumped it into an account for the girlfriend. But here's the kicker, Diane. I ran a background check on Jessica Vane, and she's got a rap sheet. 2 counts of identity theft in Florida, 1 count of fraud in New York. She's a grifter, Diane. A pro. Diane felt a chill run down her spine. Does Rob know? That's the million-dollar question, Mike said. Rob thinks he's playing Callie, but I think Jessica is playing Rob. And here's one more thing. I found a medical record for Rob from 2018. What is it? A vasectomy. Diane dropped her purse. Say that again. Rob Jenkins had a vasectomy in 2018. He shot blanks, Diane. He can't have kids. Diane's mind raced. If Rob had a vasectomy, 1, Callie's baby couldn't be his, unless the vasectomy failed. 2, Jessica's baby definitely couldn't be his. Mike, Diane breathed. Get those records, certified copies, and get them to the courthouse. I need to get back to Judge Miller. On it, Diane hung up. She looked at the OR doors. Callie was in there fighting for her life, thinking her husband was just a cheating jerk. But he wasn't just a jerk. He was a con artist, being conned by a bigger con artist. And the DNA test sitting on the judge's bench? If Rob was sterile, that test was going to be a bomb that would destroy everyone in that courtroom. Diane grabbed her coat. She had to get back to the judge before he unsealed that envelope. The narrative was about to flip. The operating room lights were blindingly bright, a stark contrast to the dim, wood-paneled gloom of the courtroom. Callie was under general anesthesia, her consciousness floating in a dark, quiet void. But her body was a battlefield. "BP dropping 80/50, the anesthesiologist shouted, his eyes glued to the monitor where the red numbers flashed ominously. "She's hemorrhaging! Clamp!" the surgeon barked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "Get the NICU team ready. Baby is coming out in 10 seconds." With a rush of fluid and a tense silence, the baby was lifted from Callie's womb. A boy. He was small, pale, and silent. The silence stretched for an agonizing 5 seconds, an eternity in an OR where every second counts. Then, a thin, wailing cry pierced the air. "He's breathing," a nurse exhaled, quickly wrapping the infant. "He's small, but he's fighting." While the NICU team whisked the infant away to an incubator, the surgeon turned his attention back to Callie. "We need to stop this bleeding. Uterus is atonic. Give me oxytocin. Stat." Back at the courthouse, time seemed to have frozen. It had been 2 hours since Callie collapsed. Judge Miller had returned to the bench, looking grim. He had received a call from the hospital updating him on Callie's critical condition. "We are back on the record," Judge Miller said, his voice echoing in the nearly empty room. "Mr. Jenkins, due to the medical emergency, I am inclined to adjourn until your wife is stable." "Your Honor," Arthur Sterling stood up, looking uncomfortable, tugging at his collar. My client insists we resolve the paternity issue today. He argues that the stress of the unknown is detrimental to his health." Judge Miller peered over his glasses at Rob, disbelief etched into his features. "Is that so, Mr. Jenkins? Your wife is currently in surgery, potentially dying, and your priority is clearing your name." "The truth is the truth, Judge," Rob said, leaning back in his chair. He looked confident, smug. "If the kid isn't mine, why should I be liable for the hospital bills racking up right now?" Diane Rossi burst through the courtroom doors. She was out of breath, her hair disheveled, clutching a manila envelope Mike Kowalski had just couriered to her. "Your Honor, I have new evidence," Diane shouted, marching down the aisle, her heels clacking rhythmically against the floor. "Miss Rossi," Judge Miller warned, "this is highly irregular." "It's critical, Your Honor. It directly impacts the validity of the DNA test sitting on your bench." Rob rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go. More delays." "Mr. Jenkins," Diane said, turning to face him, her eyes blazing. "Did you or did you not undergo a vasectomy in July of 2018 at Northwestern Urology?" The color drained from Rob's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Arthur Sterling looked at his client, stunned. "Rob? Rob stammered. "That's private medical information. She can't use that. It proves you're sterile." Diane slammed the manila envelope onto the defense table. "Which means you know you can't be the father of Callie's baby. You set this whole thing up to humiliate her." The courtroom went silent. Jessica Vane, sitting in the front row, suddenly looked very interested in her fingernails. "Wait a minute," Judge Miller said, holding up a hand. "If Mr. Jenkins is sterile, then the DNA test results I have here should confirm that he is not the father." "Correct?" "Exactly," Rob shouted, seizing the lifeline. "See? I told you, I'm sterile, so Callie had to have cheated. The baby can't be mine." He looked triumphant. He looked at Jessica for approval. But Jessica wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring at Diane, her eyes narrowing. "And," Rob added, puffing out his chest, "since I'm sterile, the only child that matters is the one Jessica is carrying, because we used, IVF. Yes, a donor. Wait, no." Rob stopped. He realized he had just walked into a trap. If he was sterile, and Jessica was pregnant naturally, which she had claimed to everyone, including Rob, then Jessica's baby couldn't be his either. The silence that followed was heavy. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. Rob slowly turned his head to look at Jessica. Jessica froze. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Rob," Jessica said, her voice high and thin. "Baby, don't listen to her. She's lying." "I have the medical records right here," Diane said, pointing to the papers. "Signed by Dr. Aris. Vasectomy. Successful. 0 sperm count as of his last checkup in 2022. Rob stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Jessica's stomach, then at her face. "You told me it was a miracle," Rob whispered. You said we beat the odds." "It is," Jessica insisted, standing up. "It is a miracle. Doctors are wrong all the time." "Your Honor," Diane interrupted, her voice cutting like a knife. "If I may, the DNA test on your bench. Who collected the sample?" Judge Miller looked at the chain of custody form attached to the envelope. "It says, collected by a technician at Vane Diagnostics." Diane raised an eyebrow. Vane Diagnostics? As in Jessica Vane? The judge's eyes widened. He ripped open the envelope. He pulled out the results. He scanned the paper. This is... Judge Miller paused, a look of confusion crossing his face. This report says the probability of paternity is 99.9%. Rob let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. See, it is mine. Wait, which baby? This report, Judge Miller said, looking up slowly, is for the prenatal test of Callie Jenkins's child. What? Rob yelled. That's impossible. I'm sterile. Exactly, Diane said. Unless the vasectomy failed. It didn't fail, Rob insisted. I get checked every year. I didn't want kids. Then how is the test positive? Judge Miller asked. Because it's fake, Rob screamed. It's all fake. Mr. Jenkins, the judge said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, low register. Did you just admit to submitting a fake DNA test to this court? Rob froze. He looked at Sterling. Sterling had his face buried in his hands. I didn't, Rob stammered. Jessica. She handled the logistics. She said she knew a guy. All eyes turned to Jessica. She stood there, trapped. The pregnant mistress in the red dress. Jessica? Rob asked, his voice shaking. What did you do? Jessica looked around the room. The exits were blocked by bailiffs. She looked at Rob, and for the first time, the mask dropped completely. Her face twisted into a sneer. You idiot, she spat at Rob. You were supposed to just pay the settlement and shut up. You weren't supposed to bring up the vasectomy. What? Rob blinked. I faked the test results to say positive, so you would think it was yours and pay child support, Jessica yelled. Wait, no, I mean... She was unraveling. Her lies were colliding. Let me get this straight, Diane said, stepping closer. You faked a positive paternity test for Callie's baby. Why? I didn't, Jessica screamed. I switched them. The positive result was supposed to be for my baby. Callie's was supposed to be negative. Aha! Diane pointed a finger at her. So you admit you tampered with the samples? Jessica stopped. She looked at the judge. I want a lawyer. You're going to need one, Judge Miller said. Bailiff, take Miss Vane into custody for contempt of court and suspected evidence tampering. No, you can't touch me, Jessica shrieked as the bailiff moved in. I'm pregnant. Are you? Diane asked quietly. Diane reached into her bag and pulled out another document Mike had faxed over. Because according to your social media, which my investigator just scrubbed, you were posting pictures of yourself doing shots of tequila in Cabo 3 weeks ago. #YOLO. Jessica went pale, and, Diane continued, I have a statement here from a clerk at Bump & Co. who remembers selling you a moon bump prosthetic belly last month. Rob stared at Jessica's stomach. Without thinking, he reached out and poked it. It was hard, like plastic. It's foam, Rob whispered. Jessica slapped his hand away. Don't touch me. The courtroom erupted. Judge Miller was banging his gavel. Jessica was being handcuffed. Rob was standing there, a man who had lost his wife, his money, and his dignity, realizing he had destroyed his life for a woman wearing a foam stomach. But the biggest twist was yet to come. Because the DNA test Judge Miller held, the one that said 99.9% positive, wasn't the fake one Jessica planted. LabCorp had sent the real results directly to the judge's chambers that morning, bypassing the tampered courier packet. Quiet, Judge Miller roared. Everyone sit down. Mr. Jenkins, sit down. When the room finally settled, Judge Miller looked at the paper in his hand again. Mr. Jenkins, the judge said, regardless of Miss Vane's theatrics, I have the certified results from the lab right here. Real results. Rob looked up, defeated. It doesn't matter. I'm sterile. Callie cheated. Just grant the divorce. Mr. Jenkins, Judge Miller said softly, the test confirms that you are the father of Callie Jenkins's baby. Rob's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Dr. Aris said, "Vasectomies can fail, Rob," Diane said gently. "It's rare. Recanalization. It happens." I have a son," Rob whispered. "You do," Diane said. "And he was just born, and his mother is in critical condition because of the stress you put her through." Rob fell back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He began to sob. Not fake tears this time. Real, ugly, guttural sobs of a man who realized he had almost killed his own miracle child and the only woman who ever actually loved him. "I need to go to the hospital," Rob wept. "Please." "You're not going anywhere," Judge Miller said coldly. "We have a lot to discuss regarding fraud, perjury, and your financial assets." 3 days later, the sterile hum of the hospital room was broken only by the rhythmic beep of monitors. Callie was awake. She was weak, pale, and sore, but she was alive. In the clear plastic bassinet next to her bed slept Leo, her son, their son. The door creaked open. Diane walked in, looking exhausted but triumphant. She carried a tablet and a large Starbucks cup. "Hey, Mama?" Diane smiled softly. "How's the little guy?" "He's perfect," Callie whispered, stroking Leo's cheek. "He has Rob's nose, unfortunately." Diane pulled up a chair. "Speaking of Rob, and everything else, you up for a briefing?" Callie nodded slowly. "Is it over?" "The legal part? Just beginning. But the hard part is over." Diane opened a tablet. "Here's the rundown. Jessica Vane, real name Jessica Vanilla, believe it or not, is currently being held without bail. Turns out impersonating a medical courier to switch DNA samples is a federal crime, plus the fraud." "She wasn't pregnant?" Callie asked. "Not even a little bit. She was targeting Rob. She knew he had money, or at least access to clients' money. She was going to fake a miscarriage after getting a settlement and disappear." "And Rob?" Callie asked, her voice hitching. Diane's expression hardened. "Rob is a mess. He's been sleeping in the hospital waiting room for 3 days. The nurses won't let him in because I put a restraining order on him. He knows about the baby. He knows. The vasectomy failed, Callie. 1 in 2,000 chance, and you hit the jackpot. Leo is his." Callie looked at the baby. Tears welled in her eyes. "He left me, Diane. He left us for a fake." "I know," Diane said, "and he's going to pay for it. Literally. Judge Miller froze all of Rob's assets. The money he transferred to Jessica's shell company? We're recovering it. It's going to take time, but we'll get it back. And since he practiced architecture without a license, his firm is done. He's facing fines, maybe jail time for the fraud." Callie looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. "I don't care about the money. I loved him." "I know," Diane said. "But he broke the contract, Callie, in every way." Just then, a commotion started in the hallway. "Please, just 5 minutes!" It was Rob's voice, cracked, desperate. "Sir, you need to step back," a security guard warned. Callie, please!" Rob yelled. Callie looked at Diane. Diane stood up to block the door. "Let him in," Callie said softly. "Callie, no," Diane warned. "He's toxic." "I need closure, Diane. Let him in." Diane hesitated, then nodded. She opened the door. Rob stood there. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. His suit was wrinkled, he hadn't shaved, and his eyes were red and swollen. He walked in slowly, his eyes fixed on the bassinet. He didn't dare look at Callie. He stopped at the foot of the bed. "Is that him?" Rob whispered. "This is Leo," Callie said coldly. Rob choked back a sob. He reached out a trembling hand, but had pulled it back. I didn't know. The doctor said I was sterile. I thought you betrayed me." "So you decided to destroy me?" Callie asked. "You didn't just leave, Rob. You tried to starve us. You tried to steal the house. You humiliated me in court with that woman." "I was stupid!" Rob cried, falling to his knees. "I was so stupid. I was scared of getting old, of being trapped. Jessica made me feel important. But it was all fake. Callie, please. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll earn the money back. Just let me come home. Let me be a father. Callie looked at the man she had married. She remembered their wedding day. She remembered the house renovations. But then she remembered the look on his face in the courtroom when he thought he had won. She remembered the foreclosure notice. She looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully. Rob, Callie said, her voice finding a new strength. Leo has a father. His father is the man who will love him, protect him, and put him first. You aren't that man. Callie, please. You aren't a victim, Rob, Callie said, her voice shaking but firm. You're an accomplice. You let that woman into our lives. You signed the checks. You emptied the accounts. You chose her. I made a mistake. Buying the wrong milk is a mistake, Callie said. Abandoning your pregnant wife is a choice. She pressed the call button on her bed rail. Callie, don't, Rob pleaded. Security, Callie said into the intercom. Please remove Mr. Jenkins from my room. 2 large guards appeared in the doorway almost instantly. Come on, sir, one said, grabbing Rob's arm. Callie, I love you, he's my son, Rob screamed as they dragged him out. He was your son, Callie whispered as the door closed. Now he's just mine. Diane walked over and squeezed Callie's shoulder. You did the right thing. I'm so proud of you. Callie wiped her tears and looked down at Leo. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for him. He deserves better than a liar. 6 months later. The ink on the divorce papers was dry. Callie sat on the porch of a small but cozy bungalow in the suburbs. She had sold the Lincoln Park Greystone. It had too many ghosts. With the settlement money, Diane had ruthlessly extracted from Rob's remaining assets and the recovery of the stolen funds from Jessica's frozen accounts. Callie had bought this place cash. She was freelancing again, designing websites from home. Leo was sitting in a high chair, smashing avocado into his face. He was happy, safe. Rob was currently serving an 18-month sentence for fraud and embezzlement. His architecture career was over. He sent letters every week. Callie burned them unopened. Jessica Vane accepted a plea deal for 3 years in federal prison. It turned out Jessica Vane had 3 other husbands she had scammed in different states. Callie was just the first wife who fought back. Callie picked up Leo and kissed his avocado-covered cheek. Just you and me, kid, she smiled. And that's plenty. She didn't need a perfect architect husband. She didn't need the fancy parties. She had the truth, and in the end, the truth was the only foundation strong enough to build a life on. While Callie focused on recovery, Diane Rossi wasn't finished. The courtroom drama had been a victory, but the financial war was still being waged. To ensure Callie and Leo's future, Diane had to follow the money, and what she found was a rabbit hole of deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Diane met with Mike Kowalski in a dimly lit diner on the south side. Mike pushed a thick folder across the table, his face grim. It wasn't just Callie's savings, Diane, Mike said, tapping the folder. Rob was running a Ponzi-light scheme with his architecture firm. He was taking deposits for high-end renovations, then using that money to pay off the previous client's contractors. But for the last 6 months, the money stopped going to contractors entirely. It went to Jessica, Diane finished the thought. Exactly. But here's the twist. Jessica wasn't just a mistress. She was the one who taught him how to do it. I traced a series of encrypted emails between them from a year ago. She reached out to him first, posing as a consultant for high-net-worth individuals. She targeted him because she saw his firm's public filings and knew he was over-leveraged. Diane scanned the emails. They were chilling. Jessica hadn't just seduced Rob. She had groomed him. She played on his insecurities about getting older and his fear of being average. She convinced him that Callie was the anchor dragging him down, the one keeping him from the lifestyle he deserved. She's a professional black widow for bank accounts, Diane whispered, and Rob was the perfect mark, Mike added. He thought he was the shark, but he was just the bait. She was planning to drain the final big deposit, a $500,000 hotel renovation, and skip town. The fake pregnancy was her insurance policy to keep him compliant until the wire transfer cleared. 1. Diane looked at a bank statement. The wire transfer for the hotel project. When was it scheduled? The day after the court hearing, Mike said. If Callie hadn't fainted, and if you hadn't brought up the vasectomy, Rob would have handed Jessica $500,000 of his client's money the next morning. She would have been in the wind, and Rob would be facing 20 years for grand larceny. Diane felt a wave of cold relief. Callie's collapse hadn't just delayed the hearing. It had inadvertently saved Rob from a life sentence and Callie from being tied to a man who had completely destroyed his soul. The day of the final sentencing and divorce decree arrived on a crisp October morning. The sky over Chicago was a piercing, unclouded blue, the kind of clarity that Callie Jenkins hadn't felt in years. She walked into the Cook County courthouse, not as the fragile, terrified victim who had collapsed on these very floors months ago, but as a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. She wore a sharp charcoal power suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek, professional knot. In her hand, she didn't carry a handkerchief for tears, but a leather-bound folder containing the future of her son, Leo. Rob Jenkins was brought in from the holding cell through the side door. The transformation was staggering. The bespoke navy suits, the gleaming Rolex, and the arrogant, architectural posture were gone. He was draped in an oversized orange jumpsuit that made him look small and withered. His hands were cuffed to a chain around his waist, the rhythmic clink-clink-clink of the metal against the floor sounding like a funeral march for his former life. Jessica Vane sat 3 rows back, flanked by 2 guards. Without her moon bump and designer wardrobe, she looked like a different person, haggard and sharp-edged. She stared at the back of Rob's head with a cold, predatory indifference, already looking for the next mark even as her own walls closed in. Judge Anthony Miller took the bench, his expression as stony as the courthouse exterior. He didn't waste a second. "We are here for the final disposition of Jenkins versus Jenkins, as well as the criminal sentencing for Robert Jenkins and Jessica Vane," the judge began. He looked directly at Rob. "Mr. Jenkins, you have pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and the embezzlement of client funds. But your greatest crime, in the eyes of this court, was the calculated attempt to use the legal system as a weapon of abuse against your pregnant wife." Rob's head bowed low, his shoulders shaking with silent, jagged sobs. "However," Judge Miller continued, "Miss, Rossi has provided extensive evidence that you were also the target of a sophisticated long con by the woman sitting behind you. You were a victim of your own vanity and greed, which allowed a career criminal to lead you by the nose." The judge then turned his gaze toward Jessica. "Miss Vane, or should I use your legal name, Jessica Vanilla, your trail of destruction spans 5 states. You are a professional predator who uses the promise of family to hollow out the lives of others. This court sentences you to the maximum of 7 years in state prison, with no possibility of early parole." Jessica didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her hair, her eyes as vacant as a shark's. "As for you, Mr. Jenkins," the judge's voice softened slightly, but remained firm, "you are sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility. But there is a secondary price. Every cent of your remaining assets, your 401k, the proceeds from the liquidation of your firm and your offshore interests will be seized and placed into a strictly managed trust for the benefit of Leo Jenkins. You will have no legal standing, no visitation, and no contact until the child is 18. At that point, it will be his choice to know you." The gavel struck the mahogany bench with a finality that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Crack! It was over. As the guards began to lead Rob away, he resisted for just a moment, twisting his body toward Callie. The guards tightened their grip on his arms, but he managed to lock eyes with her. "Callie," he rasped, his voice breaking. I hope he grows up to be like you. Not me. Never like me. Callie didn't look away, but she didn't nod either. She simply watched him go, a ghost of the man she once loved. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, she felt a strange, weightless sensation. The anger hadn't just faded. It had vanished, replaced by a profound, quiet peace. Outside, Diane Rossi was waiting by the car, a rare smile on her face. "How do you feel?" Diane asked, shielding her eyes from the bright Chicago sun. Callie looked up at the towering buildings, the architecture Rob used to brag about. "I feel like I can finally breathe," Callie said. "The air is finally clear." "You won, Callie," Diane said, squeezing her hand. "Now go home. Someone is waiting for his mum." Callie got into a car and drove away from the courthouse, leaving the wreckage of her past in the rearview mirror. She was heading toward a modest, sun-filled house where a little boy named Leo was waiting, a future built on the only thing that could survive a storm: the absolute truth. This story is a powerful reminder that while lies can travel fast, the truth has a way of catching up. Callie lost her husband, her home, and her sense of security. But she gained something much more valuable: her freedom and a future for her son. Rob and Jessica learned the hard way that when you build a house of cards, it only takes one breath of truth to bring it all down. If you found this story gripping, please give this video a thumbs up. It tells the algorithm that stories like this need to be heard. Do you think 18 months was enough for Rob, or did he get off too easy? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We have more incredible real-life dramas coming your way every week. Thank you for being part of our community. And remember, always trust your gut, because the truth is usually hidden right in front of you. See you in the next one.